He bought a love potion to get girls, but it knew he was lying. My boss keeps a mummified head in a bell jar behind the counter, and some days it's the least of my fucking problems. The rush before Samhain is always the worst. It's that time of year when the air gets thin and people with more money than sense decide they want a real haunted artifact for their Halloween party centerpiece. I spend most of October making sure nothing in storage decides to start wailing before the tourists arrive. The work never really stops. So since I've got a rare moment of quiet, I figured I'd answer some of the questions people have been asking. This place, it tends to breed questions. Most of them don't have answers, but I can share what I know. And since Mr. Alistair is actually on site this week, I might even get a few answers of my own. We'll see. He's a hard man to pin down. And yes, you wanted stories about the customers who weren't so happy with their purchases. I've got a few of those. When something from our collection goes wrong, it doesn't just break, it shatters everything around it. First, someone asked about the head behind the counter, the one I call Gary. I finally worked up the nerve to ask Mr. Alistair about him. At first, he just tilted his head, a polite but blank look on his face. He doesn't call him Gary. But the moment I said the acquisition code, B45, his eyes sharpened. I told him I was just curious, trying to keep the inventory log straight. He gave me that patient, almost grandfatherly smile, the one that never quite reaches his eyes. He stared past me, at the dust motes dancing in a sliver of afternoon light. "Ah," he said, his voice a low rustle. "The orator. Here's what I pieced together. Gary, or the orator, was a man once. Most of him still is, technically. The skin is stretched thin and dry over the bone, like old parchment, but the parts that matter are still there. The teeth. The tongue, black and shriveled in his mouth. Mr. Alistair said the eyes were replaced with obsidian beads, polished so dark they drink the light. When I asked whose head it was, he just said, someone who spoke too much and said too little. Then he moved on to dusting a row of porcelain dolls, and the conversation was over. So Gary is a little more authentic than I hoped. Maybe that's why his thoughts are always so loud. He doesn't speak, not with his mouth. But sometimes, when I'm alone behind the counter, I'll hear a voice in my head. A dry, bitter whisper, complaining about the draft. Someone else asked if I could check with my boss about a girl in the mirror. Now, Mr. Alistair is not what you'd call tech-savvy. I've never seen him use a phone. He has no computer. His office just contains a massive oak desk, a fountain pen, and stacks of leather-bound ledgers filled with a script that looks a little too much like scratching. His memory, though, is unnervingly perfect. But you asked, so I asked. When I mentioned the name, he didn't smile. He just stopped what he was doing, which was winding an old grandfather clock that hasn't worked in 50 years. He walked over to a large, ornate mirror hanging near the entrance, its silvering flaking away at the edges. He pulled the soft cloth from his waistcoat pocket and began to polish the glass in slow, deliberate circles. He didn't say a word. When he was done, he just nodded once and walked back to his clock. I looked into the mirror. For a second, just a split second, the reflection looking back wasn't mine. It was a girl with wide, terrified eyes and hair like spun silver. Then she was gone. So, I guess the answer is yes, we have one. And no, she is not for sale. While we're on the subject of things people are weirdly curious about, I got a question about a tin full of snow that never melts. We don't have that. The closest thing I could find is a small wooden music box. It's unmarked. The ledger just says, plays the song of what was taken. I tried it once, wound the tiny key on the bottom. The tune that trickled out was simple, delicate. I'd never heard it before in my life, but I knew every note. I saw my childhood dog Rusty sleeping at the foot of my bed. I smelled the chlorine from the community pool where I learned to swim. I felt my grandmother's hand in mine. A whole lifetime of tiny, forgotten losses packed into a 30-second melody. By the time it stopped, my face was wet, so no snow, just a box full of ghosts. I think I'll leave that one on the shelf. Maybe I'll feed it to Gary, see if he prefers it over the silence. Someone asked if I've ever had anything follow me home. The little charm Mr. Alistair gave me seems to work. Nothing has ever attached itself to me. The people around me, though, that's a different story. When I first started, before I knew better, I pocketed a little worry stone from a dusty bowl on the counter. It was smooth and black and felt warm in my hand. It seemed harmless. A little piece of polished river rock. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my neighbor screaming. Not a quick yell, a long, terrified shriek that went on and on. Then it was just sobbing. Through the thin apartment walls, I could hear him yelling, "Who are you? What do you want?" I never found out what happened, but the next morning, as I was brushing my teeth, I glanced at my reflection. For a moment, it smiled, but I hadn't. It was a wide, predatory grin, and it wasn't mine. I threw the stone out of my window that morning. Sometimes, though, I still catch my reflection moving a split second after I do. So yeah, I don't take souvenirs anymore. You wanted a story about a customer. You got it. This one happened a few months after I started. Back when I thought this was all just kitschy bullshit for gullible tourists, this guy walks in. You know the type. Built like a brick shithouse, with a personality to match. He smelled like protein powder and cheap cologne. I don't think he even knew what kind of place he'd walked into. He just saw a woman behind a counter and figured it was his lucky day. He started laying on pickup lines so awful they had to be a parody. I gave him one-word answers until he got pissed off, slammed his meaty hands on the counter, and demanded to know what we even sold here. So I gave him the spiel. Cursed relics, haunted artifacts, objects of power. The usual. His eyes lit up. He leaned in, a greasy grin spreading across his face, and asked if we had anything that could, and I quote, "make me irresistible." I pulled out one of the old ledgers, flipped through the pages, and found an entry for D12. A small amulet carved from what looked like bone on a leather cord. The notes were simple. Bolsters the wearer's true self. Close enough. He paid in cash, snatched the amulet, and put it around his neck right there in the shop. He squared his shoulders, puffed out his chest. "Feel anything yet, sweetheart?" he asked, winking. I just stared at him. He grumbled something about it being a scam, but he left the amulet on as he stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to make the bell jar rattle. I figured that was it. He came back 3 days later. I was wrapping a stuffed bear for a sweet-looking old lady. Our gift wrapping is just old newspaper and a bit of red twine for people who either have no taste or a deep-seated passive aggression toward the recipient. It was a warm afternoon, so the front door was propped open. The line of powdered chalk across the threshold is usually enough to keep the worst things out. I was tying the twine when I saw the bear's button eyes shift. Not the way a toy's eyes shift. It looked past me, over the woman's shoulder, toward the open door. I looked too. And there he was, the gym guy. Brown, his name was. He was running. A full-on, desperate sprint right for the museum. I handed the grandma her package. "You might want to step aside," I said, my voice low. She just gave me a polite little smile, the kind that says "you kids and your drama," and turned to leave. She wasn't fast enough. Brown crashed through the doorway and slammed into the counter, sending the cash register skittering. He was gasping, wild-eyed, babbling about shadows and whispering. I've heard it all before. 9 times out of 10, it's just bad drugs. I was about to point to our no refunds, all sales final sign when I noticed the newspaper-wrapped gift start to twitch in the old woman's bag. A tiny stitched paw pushed through the paper. The bear gave me a sad little wave. The woman didn't seem to notice. She thanked me and walked out, her new friend squirming quietly in her purse. I barely had time to process that before Brown slammed his fists on the wood again. "Are you even listening to me?" he roared. I sighed. Who is they exactly? He leaned in close, his breath hot and sour. "I don't know what they are, but they're following me. They won't leave me alone." And that's when the floor vibrated. A low, deep thrum that came from the street outside. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something else. Before I could react, Brown, this mountain of a man, vaulted over the counter and crouched behind me, using me as a human shield. Then I saw them. Gathered on the sidewalk just outside the door. They weren't people, they were shapes. tall, distorted silhouettes that seemed to drink the afternoon light. They didn't have faces, just patches of deeper darkness where a face should be. They swayed and shifted, a whole crowd of them, all focused on our doorway. A low, hissing whisper drifted in on the breeze, like 1,000 voices all speaking at once. "Wow," I said flatly. "You sure are popular." "It's the fucking necklace," he shrieked from behind me. "It's been like this since I left Relax," I told him, my heart starting to pound. "They can't come in. The chalk line will stop them." But then I looked down. The white line was smeared. A dusty boot print was dragged right through the center of it. His. "You fucking idiot," I whispered. One of them glided through the break in the line. It didn't walk. It flowed across the floorboards like spilled ink, silent and wrong. I didn't think. I kicked the doorstop away and slammed the heavy oak door shut, throwing the bolt. The whispering from outside grew louder, more frantic. Brone was whimpering behind the counter, trying to crawl under the desk. The shadow thing was coalescing in the middle of the room, rising into a vaguely man-shaped form. The whispers were coming from it now. Not words, just feelings. Contempt, disgust, failure. I scrambled for the ledger, flipping through the pages for D112. There had to be something. Do something. Brone screamed as the shadow reached a long, smoky tendril toward him. I found the entry. Bolsters the wearer's true self. Cryptic bastard Alistair. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a solid brass candlestick, and hurled it at the thing. It passed right through with a hiss of static. "What is your true self?" I yelled at Brone. "What?" "I'm a personal trainer. I'm a winner," he shouted, his voice cracking. The shadow surged toward him, the whispers getting louder. "Failure. Weakling. Fraud." And it clicked. The amulet wasn't boosting his confidence, it was amplifying the truth. And the truth was, he didn't believe a word he was saying. "What are you afraid of?" I screamed, my voice raw. The thing was wrapping itself around his leg. He kicked, but his foot just went through it. "Nothing, I'm not afraid of anything." The shadow gurgled, a sound like thick mud bubbling. The whispers grew sharp, forming words I could almost understand. Liar. Small. Pathetic. "Bullshit," I shouted at him. "It feeds on it. Just admit it." He was sobbing now, full body tremors. I'm not. The shadow began to climb his body, covering his torso, its darkness suffocating him. Then his voice broke. A tiny, hoarse whisper. "I'm a coward." The shadow froze. "My dad." He choked out, tears streaming down his face. He was a firefighter. He ran into a burning building to save a little girl. He never came out. Everyone calls him a hero. And me? I can't even walk past a fire station without wanting to puke. I'm so fucking scared of everything. He curled into a ball, weeping. I'm nothing like him. And just like that, the shadow dissolved. It didn't fade. It just vanished, leaving behind the smell of ozone and wet pavement. The amulet around his neck glowed with a soft white light for a moment, then went dark. "Congratulations," I said, my voice shaking a little. "You just had a complete spiritual meltdown." He just looked at me, his eyes red and empty. "You're welcome," I added, offering him a hand up. "Brone is okay. He comes by the museum sometimes. He's quieter now. He gave up being a personal trainer and started taking art classes. He never wears the amulet." Explaining to Mr. Alistair that I let a customer have a cathartic breakdown that nearly got us both devoured by a psychic manifestation of his daddy issues was awkward. He just nodded, polished his glasses, and said, "The truth can be a powerful cleanser. Anyway, I should probably get back out there." Mr. Alistair is standing perfectly still in the corner again, pretending to be a mannequin. It unnerves the customers. And there's a group of teenagers by the door, trying to take a selfie with a plague doctor mask. Something tells me this night is far from over.